Can you hear me? Okay. So today we are going to do a topic called as find, call, and apply. So we will be doing these three topics today. I will create a script tag, and here in this script tag I will create one object, and I will say that object as var person is equal to, maybe I'll give some key value pairs. For example, first name equal to John, last name equal to Joe, and I will create one function called as get full name, and I will create a function for that get full name, and that function will have some another variable called as var full name is equal to this dot first name plus this dot last name, and I'll return full name. Now when I say this dot first name and this dot last name, what is this matters here? What is the this means here? This means person, because this is an object, and any function inside that object, will be will have this variable which will point to this object. So when I'm saying this dot first name, it is nothing but this John, and when I say this dot last name, it is nothing but this last name. Now let's say I create another function. I will say, for example, I am saying var func1, that is a function 1, equal to function, let's say it takes two parameters x and y, and here now I am doing it as console.log. Maybe I'm saying full name is, and I'm writing this dot get full name. I'm saying this dot get full name. I'm also writing other console.log arguments are x and y, and I'm also saying console.log and put some spacer so that I can call it multiple times if I want. And so this is my function 1. Now tell me, if I run this function 1, what will be displayed here in this place, this dot get full name. So if I say like this, var x, or maybe I can say var, maybe I will f1 equal to func1, and maybe I'll pass some numbers. When I call this function 1 like this, I'm calling this function 1, what will be the value displayed here? It will, you are saying it will display error, nothing. So let's and see what is being displayed. So since we don't have the function, it's saying get full name is not a function because we haven't defined that function. We have defined that function inside this person object, but we have not defined this anywhere outside that one or in the global scope. This actually means the global scope. If I would have defined this function here in the global scope, I would have got that value here. But since this function does not exist in the global scope, therefore I am getting error. So let's try to understand now how the bind works in this situation. Now what I will do, instead of calling this function 1 with directly parameter, I will say I will call this function 1, but I will bind it. I will bind it with some object. Let's say I bind it with this person. This bind is a property of the function. So here there is a function and this function has property of bind. All the functions has the property of bind. So you can attach bind to any function, and in the bracket I will pass the person. That means I am inserting this object, or I am using this object inside this function. Then if I say this dot full name, it will take get full name from the person object. So now this will be now really applied to the person, because I am passing person here as a bind parameter. When I do the bind parameter with some object, then all the this will refer to this person, not the global scope. So now if I do, so I just created bind and assigned to it F1. Now here it takes two values. Now I can assign F1 with two values. For example, I will say 1 and 2. So X will go as a 1 and 2 will go as a Y. And this function 1 now in this case will take the object person whenever it sees this in the function code. So now if I save it and run it, so you will see the full name is John Doe. Argument is 1 and 2. Because 1 and 2 I am passing here as an argument, and this full name is coming from the person, and I am binding it. I have the function, I am calling the bind on the function, and I am binding some object, and that object will go inside as this dot full name, and it will assign it to another variable called as F1, and then I can call F1 with these two parameters to use it. We will see some more examples today, and tomorrow also we will see some few examples of this one. Let's move further now. Let's see what is the call and apply means. So let's say if I want to call this function 1, I am calling this function 1, and then I am saying call, and I am passing the object person. So here also in the bind I passed the object person. In the call also I am passing the object person, and here I will pass these two parameters X and Y. So here I will say, for example, 3 and 4, and I will run it now. So in the first case you will see the full name is John Doe, because get full name is taking from the person object. This is using the bind example. In the second case also the full name is John Doe, because it's taking the person object, and here the argument is 3 and 4, because I am passing 3 and 4 as an argument. Now let's see if I pass, if I call apply in this function 1. So I will call the apply, and I will pass the person, and again I will pass 5 and 6 as a parameter. Let's see what happened now. So here it is giving me the error, because in the apply it does not take the parameter like this. This is not the way apply takes the parameter. Apply takes the parameter in the form of arrays. So if I want to pass the parameter, I have to pass parameter as arrays. So I created an array and I passed the 0, 1 value. So 0 will go as a x and 1 will go as y. So okay, so let's check now what happens. If I refresh, so it's going 5 and 6. So now x is going as the first parameter of an array, y is going as the second parameter of an array into the function 1. Now we will try to differentiate between the bind, call and apply. So I will tell you what is the difference between the three, which we did it now. So first case is the bind. If you have seen the bind creates bind is never executed immediately. So we have to assign this bind to some variable and we can execute that variable in the next line. Whereas in the call and apply, we did not put it in some variable because it is executed immediately. That is, this function and this function is invoked immediately. Whereas in the bind case, it is not invoked. So we can assign the result of this bind to some variable and then I have to invoke that variable in the next line. But in the call and apply, I cannot assign it to something and it will call in the next line. So I have to invoke it immediately here in this apply and call. In the call, we pass the parameter as comma separated as we see in the function. Whereas in the apply, we have to pass the parameters in the form of array. So these are the three things about the bind, apply and call. Let's take one more example now. Okay, so when this is done, when this dot function name equal to, so what happened, you are assigning, you have this function name, this dot function name. So you have a variable called as this dot function name and it gets, there is some function called as this dot function name and that function with bind is assigned to variable this dot function name. And then, so it is called as, if you remember, we have done some example where we created A and the return was also A. So A was actually, if you remember, let me see one example. If you remember, we have the A variable and we were assigning it to a function and return was also a function. So A remains function only, but it changed the method of the A. So let's see if I show you some example. I'll show you some example, but the example which you have given, this dot function name is kind of some function. So we have this dot function name. This is some kind of function. And since we are using this dot function name is equal to this dot function name dot bind this. So this one is nothing but this part. It will be assigned to this F1. F1 in this case is this dot function name. So now this dot function name is the function. You call it like this, but this dot function name now will take this object inside this function. So whatever this will be inside this function will be passed by this parameter. So we are binding this dot function name with this object, maybe this object, whatever object you have, you are binding with this object to that function and you are assigning the same name, whichever is this one. So next time you can call the same function name like this, but now this one will be using this object as a parameter. So all the things which will be called this dot get full name will be from the class name from where you are calling it. Don't go to that now. If you have understood what I said, it's okay. But if you have not understood, you will understand it automatically when we do many examples of the bind, or if you do practice little bit bind. It's same thing as calling the function and assigning it to the variable with the same name of the function. We have done some examples. If you don't remember, I will show you one example which we have done. Let's say I create one self-invoking function and I am passing two parameters x and y, and this is my self-invoking function. And in this function, I'm not really invoking that function immediately, but first I am apply using the apply, and I'm applying person object to this function. I'm applying person object to this function, and I am passing also the two parameters, this x and y. Since it is an apply, so we have to pass here as an array, maybe 5, 6. So this part and this part is ultimately same, because here I created a function and then I call this function name and I call the apply. But here I immediately call a function which does not have any name. It is anonymous function, and I apply it immediately rather than creating a different variable and applying it. So I can do same thing. I can copy it here. I will paste it here. So this part I created in a separate variable and I am binding it. I am applying it here. In this case, I am not creating another function. I am creating anonymous function and I'm applying the i6 to that function. So if I run this one, again it's saying 5 and 6. Let's go to another example. I will create another object called as person2 is equal to an object, and I will give the first name as Jane and last name as N. Anything you can give. Now what I will do, I will call this function. So I will say here person, because this is the person. Inside that I have get full name. So I will say dot get full name. Since this is a function, I have all the three methods bind, call and apply to this function. So I will say get full name dot apply. I can apply also, I can bind also, I can do whatever I want. And I will pass person2 as object. So now what will happen if I run this directly person, this dot first name refers to this first name and this dot last name refers to this dot last name. But since now I'm calling this function, but I'm passing person2 as an object, so when I call this dot first name, it will not take from this one, it will take from this person, because whenever we use apply and pass some object, this becomes that object, that is this person2, not the object where we are calling it. So in this case, the default is this dot first name is this one, but since we are applying it with another object, so now the first name which will be called in this place will not be this one, it will be this one. So now if I run this one, okay, let me run this one. Okay, wait, it's not showing it. So I have 562 times. I am calling the person. Okay, I have to log it. Otherwise, it will not display it. Okay, now it's saying gain n, and it is taking from this person object, not this person object. So I created a person object. Inside that I have function, and I have this inside this function. So this really refers to this person. But if I want to change this to some other object, then I have to use bind, call, or apply. In each case, there is a different way to call it. Although the meaning in all three cases is same, but the execution method is different. So here I will say person.get full name, that is I am calling the function which I want to call. Then I will use the apply. I could call also, I could have used bind also, and then I am passing the another object which I want to use in place of this. So if I want to use different object in place of this, then I have to apply it with the different object. And if I don't use this apply, then it will take this first name and this last name. Let's take couple of more examples of the bind. Let's say if I have a function, let's create a function multiply, and it takes two parameters, and I'll return a into b. Now what I will do, I will create maybe I can say func2, or I will name it as multiply by 2. I can name it anything, and I will call this function called as multiply, and I will use the bind in that one. I will use the multiply, that is this one. And since I don't have really any object now which because I'm not using this here, whether I'm using this something kind of thing. No, I'm not using this dot full name or this dot first name or this dot last name. So I really don't care which object I'm passing to this function. So let's say if I don't have anything, I can say in the bind one. So if I pass this, I really don't care whatever I pass here. Maybe I can pass this, I can pass null. I really don't care because I'm not really using that object. So I pass this, and I'll close this one. Now what I can do, I can do console.log. I can call this function, and I will pass two variables called as 2, 3. So what happened exactly now? It will go to the multiply function, because this multiply by 2 is nothing but a copy of the multiply, but it takes the object, this object, whichever object I pass, maybe person or person2, it takes this object to use inside it. But right now, since I'm not using anything about this, I can pass this, or I can pass null, or I can leave it. I don't want to specify any object because I don't care. Now I call multiply by 2, 2 into 3. Let's see what is the result coming. So I'm getting 6 as a result. Now bind has also one advantage. When we call the bind, I can also pass these parameters along with this bind. So when I create this bind, after this one, I will also say, let's say I will say 2. So now instead of a, this 2 parameter will go. So instead of a, it will take 2 as a default constant value. It will not change. So the value of a will be 2. And now when I call this multiply by 2, I only have to specify the b value, not the a1, because a1 is already going here as a 2. So now if I want to call this multiply function, since a is already going as a 2, I will only specify 3. So now my multiply by 2 takes only 3 parameters because a is already going as a default 2. So if I refresh, it's showing the 6 one. Let's say if I pass 4, so it will show 8. So that means I can specify this value as a default by passing it here. So when I say 2 here, that means it is going like this: var a equal to 2, and it's going only b. So that means we are calling this multiply by passing the b value, and a is inside it by default using this 2. Though we don't specify that, internally it means like that. Let's take another example. In this case, I will create another variable called as multiply by 3 equal to multiply dot bind this comma 3. Now what happened? It calls this multiply function, but here in this case, by default, a value is 3. So now if I want to call something console.log multiply by 3, I will only specify the b value. Maybe I can say 5. So the answer will be a is going 3 by default, and we specify the 5 value, that will be the b, and it will give me the 15 result. These examples are only used in the bind. These examples cannot be used in the apply or call. Now let's take one more example of this. So that means in this case, multiply by 3, 3 is going by default in the a place, and b is coming from here. Let's take one more example. Maybe I will name it as z, and here I will say multiply dot bind. I will say this, and here I will pass some 5 comma 6. Since I pass two variables here, that means a and b both are going from here. So a is going by default 5 and b is going by default 6. So now if I do console.log z, and I don't pass any parameter because all the parameters are going from the bind, and I will run that one. So it is showing me 30 because 5 and 6 are going from this statement, and in the log, in the next line, we are only calling the z function, and it will take automatically the 5 and 6 as these two parameters. So this is all about call, bind, and apply. I will revise it quickly once more so that you should understand the basic concepts of these three. Bind, call, and apply have the same meaning in the higher sense. All these three are applied to the function. This is a function. So whenever we have a function, we can apply bind, we can apply call, we can apply. And when we use bind, call, and apply, generally we use when we want to pass some another object inside that function, so that that function can take this value from this object. So whenever we have the function, we can bind it with some object. This is the function, we can bind the call with the object. This is the function we can apply with the object. This is the function we call with the object. And then we use the object which we want to use. This is the object with some key value pair. And when we pass this object, whatever this is present in that function will take from that person object. If we don't have any this in this function, then whatever you pass here doesn't matter because you don't care. So you can pass this in that case. But if you care for it, that is, you have something with the keyword this, then you should pass some object inside it if you want to take the values from that object. So I can call this function, this is a function with the bind, and I'm passing this object inside this bind. Then when I run this function, it will run everything which is from this person object. Since this dot get full name is not there in the global object, and we are passing person object, so this dot get full name will take from this person object, and it will use that one. Call will also do same thing. It will take this person object and pass it to this function. Apply will also do same thing. It will take this person object and it will be use this function. And whatever parameters are there in this function, we can pass as a comma separated in the case of call. And in case of the apply, we have to pass it in an array format with the 0 pointing to the first element pointing to the second element. I can, instead of calling a different name like function like this one, I can also create anonymous function, and I can use apply with some object and with some parameters. So this one is same as this one. Only thing in this case, I am creating a separate function with different name. Here I am using anonymous function. If I create second object and I pass this second object inside the first object function, then this will not be taken from this person object. This will be taken from the second object, that is the person 2, because I'm using apply with this person 2. Now if I use bind, if I don't have anything object to pass, I can pass it as this, and then all the parameters I can pass by default here, or I cannot, I will not pass it here, but I will pass it in this case. I can also say like this, I will remove this 2 and I can pass 2, 4 here. So this is nothing but going A and B separately. But if we want to pass something as a default, I can put it in the bind statement and pass the second parameter here in the new function. So this multiply by 2 is also created a function, but this function has advantage that it can take the default values already, and we have to only pass the new values inside this function. Bind does not invoke the function immediately, but it saves as a variable in another variable. Whereas apply and call are invoked immediately as soon as we call them. So this is all about the basics of the call, bind and apply. And I will give you this in the chat. You can copy it and paste it in some notepad maybe, or I will send you the video. You can write down again and again this one. So we are done with the basics of call, bind and apply. Tomorrow I will do some other topics also, and I will ask questions related to this bind, call and apply. And if you are able to give the answers of the call, bind, apply, that means you have understood completely the call, bind and apply. And if you cannot answer it, then you need to work little hard to understand it, what is the meaning of call, bind and apply. This call, bind and apply is very important, and it is asked in all the interviews of the JavaScript. So that's it for today. Any questions?